I remember exactly where I was standing when they laughed at me. It was the crisp chill of a Lisbon winter, and the scent of stale incense clung to the damp stones of the São Sebastião church hall. The walls were a patchwork of old paint and mismatched posters, choir announcements, charity dinners, but that night they were crowded with the faces of neighbors and family, each lit harshly by the swing of the overhead lights. I was at the front of the room, heart jackhammering in my ribcage as I stood with my sketchbook fluttering in my hands, pocked with sweat where my thumb pinched the edge. Father Loureiro sat a little to the left of center, his head inclined in what could be taken for patience, but even he had an edge of wariness about him. I'd been foolish enough to believe they'd want to hear my dream, that they'd cheer for one of their own the way families do in storybooks. But after I was asked what I'd do with my future, some roundabout question lobbed at me like a stone at a stray dog, I stood straighter and cleared my throat. "I'm going to become an architect," I said, loud enough for the old women huddled in the back to hear, their hands wrapped around mugs of too sweet tea. A moment's silence. In that sliver of time I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it would catch spread, maybe my sister Mariana would beam at me or Mama would reach for my hand, but laughter came first, loudest from my Uncle Joe. He had a voice built for loud arguments at soccer matches, and it cut straight through the hush. "Carla, an architect, you'll be designing chicken coops for the rest of your days, Menina." There was a ripple of amusement then, some choking on tea, some coughing to hide grins. My ears grew hot. I looked at Mama, her lips tight, refusing to meet my eyes. Father Loureiro tapped his cane as if the sound could bring order to this chaos. "Perhaps you could apprentice with cousin Miguel," offered Tia Rosa, cocking her head. "At least plumbing is honest work, real. People need plumbers, not dreamers." This she said like the word burned her tongue. I tried to explain, but the words tangled. That Lisbon was growing, breathing, the bones of the city aching for something bold, something beautiful. I tried to show them my drawing, the sloping arch of a bridge over the Tagus, rooftops caught in optimistic sunlight. But nobody cared, they were moving on. It was as though I'd confessed to chasing storks for a living. I held my sketchbook like a shield, feeling the whispers brush slickly across my skin as I stumbled from the hall into the raw, night air. The square was empty, wet stone glowing under the yellow haze of streetlights. Lisbon's roofs pressed around me, all crumbling ochre and charcoal, ancient but alive. I pressed my forehead against a cold lamppost, wishing I could disappear into the ground. But under the rolling fear was something else, the stubborn flicker of defiance, small but fierce. I didn't go home that night. I walked the city until my legs ached, the tagulars of Alfama winding their voices from windows and alleyways, the river silver in the moonlight. By dawn, I'd decided. They wouldn't get to decide for me. Getting out was harder than even the cruelest laughter in that hall. Money was thin, and Papa was long gone, having taken his charisma and debts with him to Porto. Mama cleaned offices overnight and my sister worked the bakery. I worked too in the mornings. I delivered newspapers, then cleaned tables at fado restaurants, my fingers smelling of bacalhau even as I sketched building facades in the margins of receipts and napkins. I applied to the University of Lisbon with a battered portfolio and a letter I'd rewritten so many times the words lost meaning. "I want to remake the city that made me," I wrote. "I believe buildings shape not only our skyline but our spirit." It sounded ridiculous in my own voice, but honest. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I read it 3 times, not daring to hope it meant what it said. When I showed Mama, she just sighed, exhausted, and said, "We will manage, somehow." I hugged her tight. She patted my back with the distracted air of a sailor counting waves in a storm. University was mythic in its difficulty. I was years behind students who'd had tutors, quiet rooms for study, books without stains. I crashed into each assignment, each exam like a wave against a breakwater. There were times I thought of quitting. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the church hall, the faces in laughter. At night, I'd sneak onto the roof of our apartment, the city humming below me, and draw. I drew bridges, parks, houses full of laughter and light. The ideas kept me alive. 5 years passed, then 8. Lisbon changed, stretching upward and outward. I finished school, scraped together enough to rent a single room in Bairro Alto and began working at a small firm, nothing grand, just repairs and storefronts, but it was mine. I built up from nothing, learning to listen, to watch the way people moved through spaces, letting the city speak to me. I built parks where children ran barefoot through fountains, rehabbed ancient homes, restoring their glory. I entered larger competitions, tiptoeing each time as if afraid the city would remember to spit me out. The turning point came with a commission too big for me, a waterfront museum meant to anchor a forgotten strip of the Tagus and bring pride to a neglected neighborhood. The bid was national. I submitted anyway, my hands shaking the entire time. I imagined the old church hall. Every heartbeat was a memory of their laughter. They chose my design. I was 32. There were interviews, photo shoots, magazine spreads. It felt surreal, as if I were floating just above the ground and might fall at any moment. Mama, by then half paralyzed since a stroke, watched television coverage with a quiet resignation. "You did it," she said, voice thin as rice paper. "Now they will see." Construction took 2 years. Instead of sleeping, I drifted through the site at midnight, tracing the bones of the building, feeling the weight of every steel beam, every pane of glass. I hired whomever I could from the old neighborhoods, masons who remembered laying stones by hand, uncles and sons who knew the touch of Lisbon's dust. Near the end, somebody suggested the opening ceremony should be grand, with officials and sponsors and all the fanfare the city could muster. I didn't want City Hall, I wanted the church hall, I wanted the place where it hurt most. On the day of the unveiling, Lisbon gleamed, and the sky swept clear and blue. I wore a suit I'd bought used from a tailor's backroom, the cuffs still just a little too long. As I walked up the familiar steps into the São Sebastião Hall, the old stones hummed with memory. The inside was the same chipped chairs, battered floor, but it was packed. The new mayor was there, struggling for dignity against the weight of history. Reporters hovered along the walls, and there, scattered among them, were the faces I knew best. Uncle Joe, Tia Rosa, and even Mariana, her hands fluttering between her scarf and her mouth. The crowd murmured as I approached, my heart bumping awkwardly in my chest. Someone handed me a microphone and the feedback whined as I exhaled, steadying myself. "Many years ago," I began, my palms sweating against the wooden podium, "I stood in this room and told you my dream." A hush settled. A few people averted their eyes. You didn't believe it was possible. At times, I didn't either. But Lisbon, this city, this community, made me stubborn enough to try anyway. My mouth felt dry. "Thank you for teaching me to endure. Now I want to show you what came of it." On cue, the projector flickered, painting the stone walls with light. The first image was of the museum, sunlight catching its glass curves, the river behind gleaming silver blue, then interiors. Light cascading through high windows, children painting in a classroom, elders gathered in sunny courtyards, hands grasping railings I'd drawn on napkins a lifetime ago. The room shifted, whispers, sharp exhales. Uncle Joe's eyes locked on mine, something raw and uncertain behind his bluster. For a second, I almost pitied him, the man who'd been too afraid to dare. "This is only the beginning," I said. "Lisbon is our legacy. We choose what to build, what to repair, what to remember." There was applause, loud and rolling, spilling over itself like surf on the Malhada do Lurasol. Reporters surged forward, cameras blinking, but all I saw were my family's faces, stony and soft, bewildered and proud. Mama was wheeled up front, her hand trembling as I knelt beside her. She did not speak, but the pressure of her hand over mine was enough. Afterwards, I stepped outside for air. Lisbon was awash in late sunlight, casting gold over tiled facades. I felt a weight slide loose from my chest, like the city itself drawing a new breath around me. The days after were a tangle of interviews and meetings, but always I made time to walk home by the alleys I'd rambled in childhood. Once, a boy darted past me, trailing a battered football. I recognized in him the young Carla, all legs and impossible hopes. Word got out as it always did. The community shifted, a cautious pride on the lips of those who once laughed. I heard stories. My uncle telling the bakery regulars, "That's my niece, the architect," as if the words could retroactively rewrite history. But the most important moment came quietly, a week later, when Mariana met me for coffee beneath the giant plane tree in Praça das Flores. She looked at the table for a long time, her thumb tracing circles in the spilled sugar. "I was wrong," she said finally, her voice cracked. "They all were. I should have stood by you." I reached for her hand across chipped porcelain. "We do what we can. You kept me fed, gave me a place to come back to." She sniffed, then managed the trace of a smile. "Lisbon is lucky you're stubborn." So was she, so was Mama, stubborn enough to endure. Maybe that was what defined us. The refusal to disappear, to wither away. Now, years later, the museum stands at the water's edge, its windows full of light and faces and promise. I've built more since. Homes rebuilt from the bones of ruin, a school with colours brighter than childhood. But nothing will ever feel quite like that day, standing in the church hall, the space where I caught the full force of doubt, and where, at last, I saw it dissolve. Sometimes I retrace my old walk, the same route I took the night of my rejection. Through Alfama, its hills sharp and forgiving, past washing strung like flags over narrow streets. The city carries cracks and scars, yes, but it rises, stubborn and golden beneath the sprawl of jacaranda blooms. I am always grateful to return not just with proof in hand, but with the memory of what it cost. Lisbon is my city, my scar and my triumph. I am its daughter, its builder. I belong at last.